The harsh Montana wind swept across the dusty town of Timberline as Nora Blackett stumbled off the stagecoach, clutching nothing but the threadbare shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Unlike the other passengers who struggled with trunks and carpet bags, Nora carried no luggage, not a single possession to mark her arrival in this frontier town. The year was 1878, and she had come west with nothing but desperate hope. "Look at that one, ain't even got a satchel to her name," snickered a woman standing on the boardwalk, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What kind of person travels without so much as a change of clothes?" Nora kept her chin up as she walked past the whispers and stares. At 22, she had already endured more than most twice her age. The cruel remarks about her lack of possessions were merely pinpricks compared to what she'd left behind in Boston. The stagecoach driver tossed down the last of the luggage and tipped his hat to the other passengers. "That's all, folks. Welcome to Timberline." "Excuse me," Nora approached him. "Could you direct me to Mrs. Fenton's boarding house?" The driver pointed down the muddy Main Street. "3 blocks down, white house with the blue shutters. Can't miss it." As Nora made her way through town, she felt the weight of curious eyes following her progress. A woman alone, without possessions, was an oddity in these parts, something to be suspicious of. She quickened her pace, eager to escape the scrutiny. Mrs. Fenton's boarding house stood exactly where the driver had indicated, a well-kept 2-story structure with a small garden out front. Nora took a deep breath before knocking on the door. A plump, gray-haired woman answered, her keen eyes immediately taking inventory of Nora's lack of baggage. "May I help you, Mrs. Fenton? I'm Nora Blackett. I wrote to you about a room and possibly employment in town." Recognition dawned on the woman's face. "Yes, Miss Blackett, I received your letter, though I must say I expected you'd bring some belongings." "My circumstances changed suddenly before departure," Nora said quietly. "I have money for the first month's rent." She reached into her bodice and extracted a small pouch containing the last of her savings. Mrs. Fenton's expression softened slightly. "Very well. Come in, then. I'll show you to your room." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chair. A small window overlooked the street below. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Fenton informed her. "And I've arranged an interview for you with Mr. Thompson at the general store tomorrow morning. He needs help with inventory and serving customers." "Thank you. I'm most grateful," Nora replied. When Mrs. Fenton left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed her shoulders to slump. She hadn't lied about her circumstances changing suddenly. She just hadn't mentioned that her fiancé had gambled away everything she owned before abandoning her at the altar. The scandal had been too much to bear in Boston society. The frontier offered a fresh start, even if she had to begin with nothing. The next morning, Nora rose early and used the pitcher of water on the washstand to make herself presentable. The dress she wore, her only dress, was simple but still respectable. She smoothed her auburn hair into a neat bun and set out for Thompson's general store. She was crossing the street when a runaway horse came thundering down the main road, pulling a wagon with no driver. People scattered, diving out of the way of the panicked animal. Nora froze directly in the horse's path. "Move," someone shouted, and she felt herself being tackled out of harm's way. She landed hard, cushioned by the body of her rescuer. They rolled in the dust, and when they came to a stop, Nora found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Are you hurt, madam?" The man helped her to her feet, concern evident on his face. "No, thank you," Nora managed, trying to brush the dirt from her only dress. "Beau Hawkins," he introduced himself with a slight bow. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. His dark hair was slightly too long, and a day's worth of stubble lined his jaw. The silver star pinned to his vest identified him as the town's sheriff. "Nora Blackett," she replied. "I just arrived yesterday. Without any luggage, I hear," Sheriff Hawkins said, his expression unreadable. Nora stiffened. "News travels fast in small towns." "That it does." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Don't let the gossips bother you, Miss Blackett. What a person carries or doesn't carry is their own business. Something in his voice made her look up sharply, but his expression was kind. I should go. I have an appointment at the general store, she said. I'll walk you there. After that scare, it's the least I can do. Nora hesitated, then nodded her thanks. As they walked, she noticed people watching them curiously. They'll have something new to talk about now, she murmured. Sheriff Hawkins laughed. Let them talk. Been the subject of gossip since I pinned on this star 3 years ago. At the general store, he tipped his hat. Good luck with your interview, Miss Blackett. Nora watched him walk away, surprised by the flutter in her chest. Then she squared her shoulders and pushed open the door to begin her new life. Mr. Thompson was a balding man with spectacles and a perpetual frown. He seemed skeptical about hiring a woman with no references and no possessions, but Mrs. Fenton's recommendation carried weight. You'll start with inventory in the back, he said. 6 days a week, Sundays off. 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening with an hour for lunch. $2 a week to start. If you prove yourself, we'll discuss a raise. It wasn't much, but it would keep a roof over her head and food in her stomach. Nora accepted gratefully. The work was tedious but straightforward. Nora counted bolts of fabric, sacks of flour, boxes of ammunition, and hundreds of other items that made up the lifeblood of a frontier town. By mid-afternoon, her back ached from bending and lifting, but she didn't complain. As she was recording the inventory of canned goods, the bell over the door jingled. She heard Sheriff Hawkins's voice greeting Mr. Thompson. Her heart quickened inexplicably. Miss Blackett, Mr. Thompson called, could you come out here, please? She emerged from the storeroom to find Sheriff Hawkins leaning against the counter. He straightened when she appeared. Sheriff Hawkins wanted to check how you're settling in, Mr. Thompson explained, though his tone suggested he found this unusual. I'm well, thank you, Nora said, conscious of her dusty apron and disheveled hair. Glad to hear it. I was wondering if you might join me for supper this evening. At her startled look, he added quickly, the cafe down the street serves a decent meal, and I thought you might appreciate some company on your first real night in town. Mr. Thompson raised his eyebrows but said nothing. That's very kind, but I have a standing arrangement at Mrs. Fenton's boarding house, Nora replied. Perhaps tomorrow then? She hesitated. Back east, a single woman dining with a man would be scandalous without a chaperone, but this was the frontier and different rules applied here. Tomorrow would be fine, she said finally. Sheriff Hawkins smiled and Nora felt that flutter again. I'll call for you at 7. After he left, Mr. Thompson gave her a curious look. Sheriff doesn't usually take such an interest in newcomers. He saved me from being trampled this morning, Nora explained. Was all Mr. Thompson said before directing her back to work. That evening at the boarding house dining table, Nora felt the curious stares of the other boarders' 2 elderly sisters, a young schoolteacher and a clerk from the bank. I understand Sheriff Hawkins rescued you from certain death today, one of the sisters said, passing the potatoes. Hardly certain death, Nora replied, but yes, he helped me avoid a runaway horse. And now you're dining with him tomorrow, the schoolteacher asked, her tone suggesting this was significant. It's merely a friendly gesture to a newcomer, Nora said firmly. Sheriff's never invited me to dinner, the clerk muttered. Mrs. Fenton cleared her throat. Now, let's not make Miss Blackett uncomfortable on her second day in town. The conversation shifted to other matters, but Nora felt uneasy. She didn't want to be the subject of more gossip, especially when she was trying to establish herself respectably. After dinner, she retreated to her room and washed her only dress in the basin, hanging it near the small stove to dry overnight. As she prepared for bed in her chemise, she heard the wind pick up outside, rattling the window frame. The sound reminded her how far she was from everything familiar, how alone she was in this wild place. The next day passed in a blur of inventory tasks and nervous anticipation. At 6, she hurried back to the boarding house to prepare for dinner. Her dress was presentable if plain, and she borrowed a shawl from Mrs. Fenton, who seemed delighted by Nora's dinner engagement. "Sheriff Hawkins is well respected in these parts," the older woman confided as she helped Nora with her hair. "Brought law and order to Timberline when the previous sheriff was killed in a gunfight. He's a good man." At precisely 7, there was a knock at the door. Sheriff Hawkins stood on the porch, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and vest. He'd shaved too, Nora noticed. "Miss Blackett," he said, offering his arm. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "Please call me Beau." The cafe was small but tidy, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps casting a warm glow. Beau led her to a table in the corner, pulling out her chair with old-world courtesy. "I recommend the beef stew," he said as they settled in. "Mrs. Parker makes it with herbs from her garden." They ordered, and then an awkward silence fell between them. Nora searched for something to say. "Have you been sheriff here long?" she finally asked. 3 years, he replied. "Came to Timberline 5 years ago, worked as a ranch hand, then deputy before taking over when Sheriff Miller was killed." "I'm sorry to hear that," Beau shrugged. "It's a hard country, but it's changing. More families settling, fewer gunslingers passing through. We're building something here." "And before Timberline?" Nora asked. A shadow crossed his face. "I rode with a cattle outfit in Texas for a while. Before that, well, that's a longer story." Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation. The stew was indeed delicious, and Nora realized how hungry she was after a day of physical work. "Now, Miss Blackett," Beau said after they'd eaten in silence for a few minutes. "I hope you don't mind my curiosity, but it's not every day a young lady arrives in Timberline with no baggage whatsoever." Nora set down her spoon. "It's not a pleasant story." "Few true stories are, in my experience." She studied him for a moment, then decided to trust him with the truth. "I was engaged to be married in Boston. A week before the wedding, I discovered my fiancé had not only been unfaithful, but had gambled away my modest inheritance and sold most of my possessions to cover his debts." Beau's expression hardened. "The scoundrel, indeed. When I confronted him, he disappeared, leaving me to face the creditors and the scandal alone." She took a sip of water. "My parents died years ago. I have no family, so I gathered what money I had left and came west to start over." "That took courage," Beau said quietly. "Or desperation," Nora countered with a small smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing." He reached across the table and briefly touched her hand. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice." The rest of the meal passed pleasantly, with Beau telling her about Timberline and its inhabitants. He walked her back to the boarding house afterward, pausing at the front gate. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Miss Blackett." "Nora, please," she said, "and thank you for your kindness." "It's not kindness," he replied, his voice low. "I've enjoyed your company." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and for a moment Nora thought he might kiss her. Instead, he tipped his hat and said, "Good night, Nora. Sleep well." She watched him walk away, confused by her own disappointment. Over the following weeks, Nora settled into life in Timberline. Mr. Thompson gradually allowed her to work at the counter, where her neat handwriting and quick arithmetic proved valuable. She saved her wages diligently, purchasing a second dress after the 3rd week and some modest toiletries. She saw Sheriff Hawkins' Beau frequently, as his office was just down the street from the general store. Sometimes he would stop by on his rounds, tipping his hat to her and exchanging a few words. Twice more he invited her to dinner, and once they attended a town social together, causing quite a stir among the local gossips. "He's sweet on you," Mrs. Fenton declared one evening as Nora returned from a walk with Beau. "We're friends," Nora insisted, though her heart whispered otherwise. "Friends don't look at friends the way that man looks at you," Mrs. Fenton replied with a knowing smile. The truth was, Nora was afraid to acknowledge her growing feelings for Beau. Her experience in Boston had left her wary of trusting again, of believing in the possibility of happiness. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon in late June, nearly 2 months after Nora's arrival in Timberline. She was minding the store alone while Mr. Thompson visited his sister in the next town. The bell jingled, and she looked up to greet the customer with a smile that quickly faded. "Hello, Nora," said a familiar voice that sent ice through her veins. "Edward." She gripped the edge of the counter for support. "What are you doing here?" Her former fiancé stood before her, elegantly dressed as always, with the charming smile that had once made her heart race but now made her stomach turn. "Is that any way to greet your betrothed? I've come to take you home, of course." "I am not your betrothed," Nora said coldly. "You made that quite clear when you stole my inheritance and left me to face your creditors." Edward waved a dismissive hand. "A temporary setback. I've come into some money since then. All is forgiven." "Not by me," Nora replied. "Please leave, I have customers to attend to." She gestured to the empty store. Edward's smile hardened. "Don't be difficult, Nora. You can't possibly prefer this." He glanced around disdainfully. "Frontier existence to the life we could have in Boston." "I prefer honesty and hard work to lies and theft," she said, raising her chin defiantly. He moved closer, leaning across the counter. "You're making a scene. We should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss. Please leave." Edward's charming facade slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "You're coming with me, Nora. I didn't track you across half the country to return empty-handed." "Is there a problem here?" Beau stood in the doorway, hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Nora had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. "This is a private matter," Edward said coldly. "Between me and my fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," Nora corrected firmly. Beau's eyes narrowed. "This would be the gentleman from Boston, I presume." "Edward Chamberlain," the man introduced himself with a stiff bow. "And you are Sheriff Beau Hawkins." He moved into the store, positioning himself between Edward and the counter where Nora stood. "Miss Blackett has made it clear your presence is unwelcome." "I suggest you leave town on the next stage." Edward laughed incredulously. "You can't be serious. You have no authority to order me from town. As sheriff, I'm responsible for keeping the peace. Right now, you're disturbing it." Beau's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable threat. "This is absurd. Nora, tell this lawman that there's been a misunderstanding." Nora stepped around the counter to stand beside Beau. "The only misunderstanding was my ever trusting you, Edward. Please go." For a tense moment, Edward looked as though he might argue further. Then his gaze flickered to the badge on Beau's chest and the gun at his side. "Very well, but this isn't over, Nora." "Yes," she said firmly, "it is." With a final glare, Edward stormed out of the store. Beau followed him to the door, watching until he disappeared down the street. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning back to Nora. She nodded, though her hands were trembling. "Yes, thank you." He might cause trouble. Men like that don't take kindly to being refused. "I know," Nora sighed. "I'm sorry to involve you in my problems." Beau stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Your problems are my concern, Nora. Surely you know that by now." She looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I care for you, more than as a friend." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending warmth up her arm. "I have since the day you arrived in town with nothing but your courage." "Beau," she began, not knowing what to say. The store bell jingled again as a customer entered. Beau reluctantly released her hands and stepped back. "We'll talk later," he promised. "In the meantime, I'll keep an eye on your former fiancé." For the rest of the day, Nora moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind in turmoil. Edward's appearance had reopened old wounds, but Beau's declaration had sparked something new and frightening in its intensity. That evening, she declined dinner with the other boarders, claiming a headache. She was sitting by her window, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold when she heard a commotion in the street below. Looking down, she saw Edward, clearly drunk, shouting up at her window. "Nora! Come down and face me, you ungrateful woman." Several townspeople had stopped to stare. Nora's cheeks burned with humiliation. She was about to withdraw from the window when she saw Beau striding purposefully toward Edward. "That's enough, Chamberlain," the sheriff said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "You're disturbing the peace." Edward swung around unsteadily. "Ah, the gallant sheriff, tell me, what does a frontier lawman know about a woman like Nora Blackett?" "She's Boston society, bred for finer things than this dusty backwater. She's a woman who deserves respect," Beau replied evenly. "Something you clearly know nothing about, respect," Edward laughed harshly. "Look at her, she arrived here with nothing, not a single possession to her name. Everyone in town mocked her for it. What kind of woman travels without so much as a trunk?" Beau's next words stopped Edward cold. "You're wrong, she wasn't carrying nothing." His voice softened, though it still carried to where Nora stood frozen at her window. "She carries my heart." A hush fell over the onlookers. Edward gaped, then recovered enough to sneer. "How poetic, but she belongs with me." "She belongs wherever she chooses," Beau replied, "and I don't think she's chosen you." Edward lunged suddenly, catching Beau off guard with a wild punch that connected with his jaw. Beau staggered back but didn't fall. When Edward came at him again, Beau sidestepped and delivered a single, powerful blow that sent the Boston man sprawling in the dirt. "You're spending the night in jail," Beau said, hauling Edward to his feet. "And in the morning, you're on the first stage out of Timberline." As he led Edward away, Beau glanced up and caught Nora's eye. The look they exchanged sent her heart racing. The next morning, Nora heard that Edward had indeed been escorted onto the eastbound stage, with Beau's firm warning never to return. She was arranging a display of ribbons in the store window when the sheriff himself appeared. "He's gone," Beau said simply. "Thank you," Nora replied, setting down a spool of blue satin. "I meant what I said last night." He stepped closer, his eyes earnest. "About carrying my heart," Nora's pulse quickened. "I heard you." And I'm afraid," she admitted. "The last time I trusted someone." "I'm not him," Beau said gently. "I know that, but it's not just about trust. I have nothing to offer you, Beau. No dowry, no family connections, not even a proper trousseau," he laughed softly. "Nora Blackett, do you think I care about such things? This is the frontier. We value different qualities here: courage, determination, honesty. You have those in abundance. Still, people talk about how I arrived with nothing." "Let them talk," Beau interrupted, taking her hands in his. "I know what it's like to start over with nothing. I came to Timberline with just the clothes on my back and the gun on my hip after losing everything in a fire back in Texas. My ranch, my savings all gone." "You never told me that," Nora said softly, "because what matters isn't what we've lost, but what we build from the ashes." He squeezed her hands. "And I want to build something with you, Nora, if you'll have me." She looked into his eyes and saw the future she'd stopped believing in. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll have you." Their wedding was held that autumn as the aspen trees turned gold against the mountain slopes. The entire town turned out to witness the sheriff marry the woman who had arrived with nothing, but ended up with everything that mattered. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Beau would tell the story of the beautiful woman who stepped off the stagecoach carrying no luggage, who endured the town's gossip with quiet dignity, and who taught him that the most precious things in life couldn't be packed in trunks or carpet bags. "Your mother," he would say, pulling Nora close, "taught me that what we carry in our hearts matters more than what we carry in our hands." And Nora, who had once lost everything, would look around at the home they'd built together, at their children, at the life they'd created from nothing but love and determination, and know that she'd never truly been empty-handed at all. In the spring of 1885, 7 years after Nora first arrived in Timberline, the town held a celebration for their sheriff and his wife. Beau had been elected mayor, and their general store purchased from Mr. Thompson when he retired had become the heart of the community. "To the Hawkins family," the town doctor proposed, raising his glass in the crowded town hall. "Who proved that true wealth isn't measured by possessions, but by the lives we touch and the love we share." As the townsfolk cheered, Beau leaned close to whisper in Nora's ear, "Not bad for a woman who arrived carrying nothing." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder as their 3 children played nearby. "I wasn't carrying nothing," she reminded him. "I was carrying your heart."